干什么？乐谱公布批54，54。没事吧？啊，谁叫你停下来？如果放过他，最感谢我的人是他的对手，准备要痛宰他了。
Two things that I want to bring up. The first is how they're practicing. They're basically running drills in almost full fencing gear. The only thing that they're missing are the things that would be required for electric fencing, the lame, the extra glove, the mask, and everything. So they have on full fencing pants, their fencing jacket, probably have a plaster on underneath it. The thing is, this is both unrealistic and realistic at the same time. The reason it's not so realistic is because to any fencer who has been fencing for more than, I would say, at the most, like a few months or something, then they don't do this anymore. The thing is, fencing gear is relatively easy to move in, but it is a little bit thicker than just, normal clothes, but because it is meant to serve as, protective gear. That's the whole point of it, really. So it's not always very breathable. It kind of depends on whether you get cotton or polyester. But no matter what, it's definitely thick enough that if you start, running laps and doing a lot of drills that do not require the protective gear, then you will start feeling it very quickly. And it's there's not really a reason to have it. So pretty much everyone does these kinds of drills, like just basic conditioning and everything, without it. The most you might see is someone will have on their fencing pants because they might need it for later on in the class, but they'll have on just like a regular shirt and they won't wear their protective gear until they get to a drill that they need it. That being said, I have seen a few overzealous beginner students do this kind of thing where they try to make it through the whole class wearing the entire set of protective gear. It does happen occasionally, and it usually stops after the most a couple months. It kind of depends on how hard the student works. So it sometimes happens, for the most part, it doesn't really happen. And then the other thing was just a clarification of a term that he used, balestra. A balestra is very similar to an advanced lunge with one tiny difference. In fencing, there are multiple ways of moving forward and backwards. When moving forward, one of the differences between just an advance can be something called the jump forward, where basically it's exactly like it sounds, you jump forward. It's done in a way that your legs move in pretty much the same way, except the difference is with an advance, it's a little bit slower, but it's more controlled. The jump forward, it's quicker and a little bit faster. So it's not something that you can really do all the time, but it can be a good way to be able to go forward while changing up your timing. It's something that you don't really see very often, but everyone should know how to do it. The balestra is basically an advanced lunge, but instead of an advance before the lunge, it's a jump forward. So some people know it as a jump lunge, but the proper term is balestra. I don't know why doing 50 of them all in a row would be beneficial, but that's kind of in line for the weird sort of work ethic I've seen in this show. But that's what a balestra is. But of course, they're doing it rather poorly. I will say they're doing it technically correct. Like, looking at that, it is more of a balestra than an advanced lunge. But the thing is, when you jump forward, the main thing to sort of get used to is the fact that your torso does not go up. That's one of the things that they teach beginning fencing students a lot with just their regular footwork, which is, as you move forward or backward, basically whatever you do, your torso does not move up and down. It should remain on a steady axis. The same principle applies to jump forwards and jump backs, but it's a little bit harder to do. And when you're incorporating that into an advanced lunge, so the balestra, then I believe it's even harder. This doesn't look like the kind of balestra that someone who got into a fencing academy would be doing. It would be a lot smoother. It would be much faster footwork. Their torso would remain steady the entire time. But it is technically a balestra.
实力不足，却硬要留在队伍中，只会造成大家的麻烦。为了团队的成绩，我希望一红能退学，那就来挑战吧。我记得振宇学院有一个很特别的规定，说如果学生之间有什么冲突，可以用运动挑战的方式来解决。如果你赢了，我就给一红一个机会，跟他在一起。但是，如果你输了，你就给我机会，跟我在一起。
在个人赛中，每一场比赛方式采用每盘击中15球，比赛时间为9分钟。一名运动员击得15分，或者9分钟规定时间全部用完，击中得分多的运动员获胜。
Okay, they were almost right. I gotta commend them for that kind of effort. So what they were saying about the time limit and the score limit, technically that's true. In tournaments, when it gets to the second stage, that is called the DE rounds, which stands for direct elimination. Basically, it's the kind of thing where once you lose, you're out. DE rounds are composed of longer bouts, which are first to 15 touches. Now, the thing is, it's a little bit different according to what weapon it is. In foil and epee, this sort of setup is accurate. It is 3 periods of 3 minutes each with 1 minute break in between, or first to 15 touches. If someone gets to 15 first, then they win. If they run out of time, then whoever has the higher score wins. If they are tied at the end of the time limit, then it will go into overtime. One person is randomly given priority, but it becomes basically sudden death. Whoever gets the next point wins. If no one gets a point within that 1 minute overtime, then the person with priority wins. And like I said, priority is just randomly assigned. It's basically a coin flip. So that's how it's set up in epee and foil. In saber, it's a little bit different. The score limit is still the same. It is still first to 15 touches. However, because saber goes by so quickly, there's never a reason to even have the time limit. So there actually is no time limit in saber direct elimination. Both fencers do get a 1 minute rest, but it's at the 8-point mark. So when one of the fencers gets to 8 touches first, then they take the 1 minute break. It's not 2 1 minute breaks, it's not one for each fencer, it's just when the score first reaches 8 on either side, then they take the 1 minute break. And then they keep fencing to 15. So they were almost correct. If this was a show about foil or epee, they would be correct, but they took the premise of foil or epee direct elimination and applied it to saber, when in actuality, in saber direct elimination, there is no time limit.
得到12分就赢了。
速战速决的。 这一分是我输了，我出界，继续。
Okay, I stopped it in the middle of the bout to mention something. She claims she went out of boundary, basically just going off the strip. I didn't actually see that happen, but whatever. The rule that she's referring to is about going off the strip. If a fencer places both their feet on the outside of the long side of the strip, then the action is halted. They go back onto the center, and then the fencer who went off the strip loses a meter. So they start again, but a meter back from where they were. If, however, a fencer goes past with both feet on the short end of the strip, then the action is halted and a touch is given to their opponent. And it's definitely both feet. There are a lot of examples out there of fencers who are on the very end of the strip and they're very close to going off, but they're stretching their back foot way forward to make sure that they're still on the strip. Something interesting that I want to just very quickly mention is if someone is within the very last part of the strip and they go off the long end, then losing that meter of distance can actually push someone off the end of the strip. So it is possible to lose a point by going off the very end of the strip. I believe it used to be that if you went off the short end of the strip, then your score went down by 1 point, but they changed it so that now it's just basically a red card, which means your opponent gets 1 point. So that's what she's referring to, but like I said, I didn't really see it happen. And since I paused it here, I want to basically say that this entire bout is really confusing. I don't really see what's going on here. I can't tell what they're trying to do. I just know it's a bunch of flashing actions that make no sense in terms of, how they're fencing. Because this isn't fencing. This is swinging their blades at each other with, very quick camera cuts and going back and forth. And, it's not even going back. It's this. A lot of what I've seen in this show is basically trying to take fencing as a foundation, but then throwing a lot of actual technique and rules out the window and replacing it with stage fighting. But in this case, there's even more stage fighting and less fencing. They're just swinging their blades at each other. There's no real action to follow. Like, in the episode where this character was fencing this character and basically showcasing what sort of a difference there is between them, that was a much better bout than what is happening here. This is supposed to be against two very experienced fencers, but it looks like two overzealous beginners who were suited up and pitted against each other for the first time. It really doesn't look like either of them know what they're doing. There's no real semblance of technique or control or anything. And the thing is, this is something that they have consistently gotten wrong, not just in how their fencers interact, but also how bouts are controlled. There are typically refs, even for practice bouts, particularly in saber practice bouts, there are still refs to determine what's going on. But I haven't seen that once. And apparently this is about with a lot of strings attached to it, but they still don't have a ref, which means it's open to personal bias. And there are other things that you need a ref there for, but it's, they're completely ignoring that. So this is actually, this is supposed to be, a good bout to watch, but honestly, it's one of the worst ones I've seen so far.
这防守还是老毛病，一被抢下攻击就慌掉了。注意一下。今天训练到这儿，解散。
队长，你叫我。
想升上一军吗？
我田志当然想，我可不想一辈子在二军打杂。
有志气，就拿出行动。
Well, I wouldn't call that a very good representation or a very good episode. There was very little fencing, and they tried with a couple terms, but half of which they kind of got wrong. This is, I don't know, this was kind of a low point for them, and the whole series wasn't even that great to begin with. I think for this one, it would get a pretty low score. I think for this episode, it would be a 3 out of 10. I just didn't like it very much. They could have done a lot better, and they just didn't. So that's the end of that. I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you next week. Bye.